I was used to opening charity evenings the way a conductor opens a symphony, with a gesture that stops the noise, with a smile that reconciles those who have come for a glass of champagne and a photo next to me. But this time the light didn't hit me. It tore through the darkness above the stage, and on the screen behind me, the numbers from my own accounts crawled like cold snakes crawling out of a crack in the floor. The cameras in the front row froze. Even the glassy laughter of the hall froze in surprise, and only I felt the metallic taste of fear rise in my throat, the same, inexorable one that doesn't sell with suits and security. I touched the microphone to take control of the pause, but the screen flashed again. Now there was my correspondence with the auditor, marked by nights and compromises that smelled of cheap remorse. "This is a montage," I said, as if the avalanche could be stopped with a word. "Someone wants to humiliate me in front of you." "Someone," repeated the host, and in his eyes I recognized the irritating curiosity of a hungry dog. "Are you sure, Mr. Grigory, that this someone is not sitting in your office?" I saw him before I realized it, a thin figure in black, pressed against the side stage, like a shadow that had forgotten the rules of decency. My brother, the younger one, the one in whom I had once raised obedience instead of a spine and gratitude instead of a voice. He looked at me the way one looks at a magician whose sleeve is finally unbuttoned and empty. "Why?" I did not speak. I asked, and this request was more shameful than any numbers. "Daniel, why?" "Because you made a mistake in arithmetic." He did not raise his voice, but everyone heard him. "You subtracted conscience, like zero, and multiplied by silence, like infinity." The people who a moment ago wanted photos now wanted my blood, but culturally, in comments, stories, and morning broadcasts. I stood in the light, like a marlin caught on a fishing rod, and every word spoken in the past suddenly became a burden that you could not throw overboard. The security moved, the cameraman licked close-ups from the air, and I suddenly remembered the smell of the children's room, where Danilo and I built cities out of blocks and argued over whose tower would survive the storm that someone imaginary brought into our palms. "Grigory," the counselor approached, barely touching my elbow, as if afraid of getting burned by my already burning reputation. "We have to leave, right now." I didn't leave. I looked into the hall, where the mathematics of survival had frozen on the faces of my former friends, and for the first time allowed myself honesty that doesn't bring applause. I didn't know where exactly I had betrayed myself. In the first zero that I had temporarily moved to the wrong place, in the first silence that looked like a strategy, or in the first praise that I had accepted instead of the truth. When the lights were turned off, it became quiet, like in a temple before confession, and in this darkness I realized that everything I had built would now build me. And it wasn't a fact that I would survive. The first 3 days after the scandal, I spent in silence, not even broken by the sound of my own breathing. The phone that had once rang like a cash register now lay dead on the table. The news said more about me than I ever said about myself. "The empire of Grigory S. is cracking at the seams," they wrote, and every word cut through my memory like a scalpel. My offices were searched. Former partners threw my name under the train of their own salvation, and lawyers spread their hands. "We warned you." No one warned me about the emptiness that remains when not only investors, but also your own shadow turn away from you. I tried to act. I gathered the board of directors, although most of them had long been looking for new gods to worship. They sat across from me, not looking at each other, leafing through the documents that were supposed to save me. But I could see each of them preparing their own way out, quiet, clean, and bloodless. "We can shift some of the blame to the accounting firm," someone said, not looking up. "Or to Danilo," another added. "If we prove he acted out of revenge, the public will perceive it as a personal conflict." I smiled, and that smile had everything: bitterness, exhaustion, and an inexplicable relief, because for the first time I saw what I had made them into. People like me. People who could live without a heart, but not without a plan. "You don't understand," I said quietly. "This isn't about guilt. This is about the justice I once bought, and now it's come to pay for it." After that meeting, I left the building unguarded. The street greeted me with the roar of a crowd that didn't see me as a person, only as a symbol of my downfall. The cameras shone in my face, and each flash felt like a blow. Someone shouted, "You stole more from countries than from people." I didn't answer. because maybe he was right. In the evening, I went to a place I hadn't been to in a long time, to my parents' old dacha, where Danilo and I used to fish and quarrel over little things that now seemed like the only sincere moments of our childhood. The house was gloomy, with peeling shutters, but alive. I went inside, into the darkness, where it smelled of dust and old memories. On the table was an envelope, white, flat, with my name on it, Danilo's handwriting. Inside was a flash drive, and a short line. If you really want to know the truth, watch this. But not before you think about whether you're still ready to hear it. I sat in front of an old laptop that was barely breathing and stared at the black screen for a long time before pressing play. The first frames were cameras from my own offices. The people I considered my own were sitting next to Danilo. They were laughing. They had been preparing for this for years. They had created my empire only to blow it up from the inside at the right moment. And Danilo was just a key that I had once given him, thinking that he would not understand what he was holding in his hands. When the video ended, I sat motionless. There was nothing left inside me, neither anger nor fear. Only understanding. I had created the monster that was devouring me. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to do next. The night after that video was the longest of my life. I sat by the old window, listening to the rain pounding on the roof, and I felt that every drop was my missed chance. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I didn't think. I just replayed in my head the faces of those who laughed in that recording. The people to whom I gave everything. Power, money, freedom. And it was they who dug the hole I fell into. But the scariest thing was that they didn't do it for profit, but for an idea. At dawn, I heard footsteps in the yard. Slow, confident, without fear. I went out to meet them, and through the morning fog I saw a familiar face, wrinkled but calm. It was Levko, my former accountant, who had left 10 years ago when I first decided to optimize financial flows. Then I called him a coward, and he replied, "You just haven't learned the difference between a number and a soul yet. Did you know they were preparing this?" I asked without greeting. "I guessed," he replied, sitting down on the wet bench. "But you were deaf to anything that didn't smell like profit." He took an old folder from his pocket, tied with rope. Inside were documents, letters, agreements, copies of signatures that I had signed without reading. Some of them weren't even mine, forgeries made by people in my circle. "Here's your empire," he said. "You were just a facade. While you were busy with your image, they were building a mechanism inside that now works without you." I took one sheet, an old contract with a banking group, signed 6 years ago. And under my signature was the second name, Danilo S. "He didn't do it alone," Levko said quietly. "He was also a pawn. He was given proof of your lie, made to believe that only by destroying you would he free himself. But he didn't know that he would become only a tool." I was silent, because something that I had once stifled had awakened inside me. Real anger, not ostentatious, not businesslike. The kind that makes you not count losses. "And what should I do now?" I asked. "Restore everything? Clear my name?" Levko smiled sadly. "Restore? It's impossible, but you can understand why it happened. And then decide, to live on or destroy what's left." I looked at the documents, at the forged seals, at the surnames that I had once written in contracts with pride. Every word was now like a shard of a mirror, painful, but true. That night, I burned everything. My files, contracts, old photos, even my passport. And I watched as the fire licked my past. But among the ashes, one sheet remained. A newspaper clipping about the opening of a children's foundation that I had once created just for PR. In the photo, Danilo, still a teenager, holding the hand of an orphan girl and smiling sincerely, truly. And I realized that he believed then, in me. And in this darkness, amidst the smell of smoke, I made a decision, to find Danilo. Not to take revenge, but to ask the question that I was afraid to ask even to myself. When exactly did we stop being brothers? I didn't find him right away. I spent weeks searching, making empty calls, chasing people who had once worked for me and now worked for silence. Every trail led to a dead end, as if someone had deliberately blocked the way to him. But one morning I received a message, just an address. No name, no signature. An old port on the outskirts of town. The place where Danilo and I had first dreamed of starting our own business, as children, still believing that money could be a path to freedom, not a chain. I arrived late at night. The air smelled of rust and sea salt. and that smell was strangely soothing. Inside the warehouse, under the flickering lights, he stood alone. No guards, no theater. And when he raised his head, I saw in his eyes not victory, fatigue, deep as guilt. "I knew you would come," he said calmly. "You always come back when something is on fire. You ruined everything." I heard my own voice, but it no longer sounded authoritative. "We could have lived differently." "We?" He smiled bitterly. "You lived?" And I watched. "When you collected money, I collected other people's faces, those you deceived. And one day, I simply realized that I could no longer remain silent. And so you became part of those who used you?" I took a step closer. "Do you think they were pure?" "They manipulated you, like me." "Maybe," he shrugged. "But at least I destroyed the lie." I looked at him, my brother, my reflection, which the world had once divided into successful and worthless. And something new appeared in me. Not anger, not resentment, but a strange clarity. "Do you want to know the truth, Daniel?" I said, taking the last document that I hadn't burned from my pocket. "Here's the deal. You're sharing all this. They made it for you. You're a co-owner. And now that the empire is burning, the responsibility is yours too." He took the sheet, read it, and froze. His eyes trembled. "Did they use me?" "Like me." I took a step forward. "But there's a difference. I sold out consciously. You, with faith." We were silent for a long time. Somewhere in the darkness, the wind rustled, the old metal beams swayed, and it all sounded like a confession that no one wanted to listen to. "So what now?" he finally asked. "Now we either hide for the rest of our lives, or we go to the end." I answered. "I have copies of all their schemes. If we make this public, they will fall. But we will fall with them." He was silent, then laughed softly, not with joy, but with relief. "That sounds honest. Finally honest." And in that moment I realized, the real war wasn't between us. It was between who we had become and who we were supposed to be. We sat down next to each other on an old box. I felt the silence squeezing my chest, but for the first time it wasn't scary. For the first time we were equals. "If they wiped us off the news tomorrow," he said, "would anything remain?" I looked him in the eye and replied, "Perhaps the truth would remain. And the truth is also a form of immortality." And we pressed send. Documents, records, testimonies, everything went out into the world. Not for the sake of retribution, but to do the right thing for once. When it was all over, there was no explosion, no applause. The world didn't turn upside down. It just became colder. We sat in the same building, watching the messages flash on our phone screens. Journalists, courts, people who had finally seen what had been hidden for years under the glare of numbers. My name was now a symbol not of power, but of revelation. They called it a historical turning point, but that word seemed foreign to me. Because history is what the victors write. And I simply survived. A few days later, the investigators arrived. Danilo surrendered first. I followed him. We didn't hide. For the first time in our lives, we didn't come up with plans. In the cell, which smelled of dampness and iron, I felt more free than in my own office with a panoramic view of the city. There, among the concrete walls, there were no shareholders, no cameras, no judging eyes. There was only the truth, quiet as the night after a thunderstorm. One evening I was summoned for questioning. The young prosecutor, nervous and too correct, leafed through the papers for a long time, looking for the monster in me that he had been promised in the reports. "Why did you do it?" he finally asked. "You could have escaped. You had money, contacts, protection. Why did you destroy everything you had?" I smiled, but there was no longer any pride in that smile. Because I understood, the truth does not destroy. It simply removes everything superfluous. I lived in a palace of lies, and I had to burn it down to see the sky. The prosecutor fell silent, and I thought of Danilo. He was sitting in the next cell. We no longer spoke every day, but the silence between us was not hostile. It became a silent apology. I knew he was suffering because I understood too late, as I did. But, apparently, there is no other way. A year later, I was released on parole. Without money, without a home, without a name. The world that once bowed down to me now looked right through me. And it was deserved. I returned to the same dacha where it all began. I restored the roof, made an old boat. One morning I sat on the pier, listening to the water touching the wood. And in that sound for the first time I heard not the end, but a continuation. I opened the old mailbox. Inside, a letter. Danilo's handwriting. I found that girl from the photo. She has grown up. She says she wants to create a real foundation, not for her reputation, but for people. She says it will be our duty to the world. I will help her. If you want, come. Without titles, without suits. Just like a brother. I held that letter in my hands for a long time, until the wind tore it off and carried it over the water. And I didn't run after him, because I realized that everything that mattered was no longer on paper. It was inside. I no longer count money. I don't look for excuses. Now I only count moments, those in which I can remain human. And if I'm ever asked again if it's possible to be rich and honest, I'll answer, it's possible. But first you have to be poor enough to understand what honesty means.